Alright, I guess this is going to be Pod 10. Would have been Pod 8, but came up with some different material for Pod 8 and then Pod 9, which I'm still working on the editing for that, but wanted to get this recorded really quickly. Tried this previously, but didn't quite do it correctly, I think, so I'm going to do a little bit of a reset on this. But I guess the thing that prompted this pod idea in particular, and this is going to be a bit of a Game of Thrones podcast here, but just interested in particular in several of the Cersei chapters that I've been reading in A Feast for Crows, the fourth book of the novels of the Game of Thrones series, and just interested in these portrayals of Cersei in particular, because she seems so much to be a character that is, I think, intended in a lot of ways to irritate the reader. She's clearly portrayed as a bit of a villain, arrogant, annoying, essentially, not quite as intelligent as she seems to think she is. Lots of different points where both the characters around her in the story and I assume the reader themselves are supposed to have a negative impression of her. But I think that what George R.R. Martin does really well in a lot of these chapters in Game of Thrones, because it's very much a short story style where the particular character gets their perspective for a few pages and then the scene shifts and we see things from a different perspective. And so I think that a lot of the perspectives are very interesting. I would assume there's a lot of Jaime fans out there for a lot of reasons, and then you don't see from the perspective of a character like a Robb Stark, but we see a lot from Bran's perspective, and you could make an argument that essentially, Bran is being used by George R.R. Martin as basically being the sort of spirit animal, if you will, of the Starks in general, that he is not even necessarily an individual as much as he is just a representation of the whole Bran the Builder sort of idea. And that's sort of a weirder theory that's not even worth getting into here, because I'm more interested in the Cersei chapters, and her chapters really basically like the grown-up version of at least the character that Sansa is early on in the story, the sort of privileged child of nobility, first female in line to, get some sort of politically advantageous marriage of some kind, and having various sorts of expectations for that, and arguably, especially with Sansa, elements of arrogance to her character on that basis of her privileged position, whether that's relative to other friends of hers who are subservient to her, or to her little sister who's not as quote-unquote virtuous as Sansa, in the sort of ways that womanly virtue are celebrated in the books. And you can kind of see that by how they're treating Brienne in a lot of her chapters, where she's being derided by lots of people, whether it's Randall Tarley or others, for breaking conventions as far as femininity is concerned, and those who embody it most excellently in the minds of the people in the story, people like Cersei, arguably somebody like Sansa, they're placed in a sort of a privileged position of sorts that makes them important characters. And then in this book, Cersei is essentially reeling from the death of Joffrey, her firstborn, and so she's having kind of a Catelyn moment of having a bit of a struggle, not not unreasonably so, after the death of the child, and so she's making her way through that. And so what I wanted to do, though, is in this thing to, on page 513 of my copy of For A Feast for Crows, Cersei says something I think is interesting. She says, I think this is about Tommen, or Tommen has a cat or something, but Black Cat's brought ill luck. She would have been my daughter if the Mad King had not played his cruel jape on father. It had to have been the madness that led Aerys to refuse Lord Tywin's daughter and take his son instead, whilst marrying his own son to a feeble Dornish princess with black eyes and a flat chest. So I guess the larger point of this sort of pod is going to be to go over the point that I believe Cersei is mad, as was her father Tywin, at least in some sense. And in this particular quote, what she's not seeing and what Tywin didn't see is the lack of precedent of Lannisters marrying into the royal family, not seeing the royal status of the Dornish, like I said, the lack of previous familial ties between the Targaryens and the Lannisters, as opposed to like the Targaryens and the Baratheons or the Tyrells, or whoever of these houses have had these marriages and alliances, especially the Dornish, with the Targaryens. And so you can certainly see why in, a Tywin's case, he would be angered and upset when Cersei is rejected for Rhaegar, as Oberyn discussed with Tyrion in one of my other pods. But, the Lannisters, and George does a good job of this as well, of crafting characters who are sort of shaped by the territories they're from. So you've got the Vale Lords, who are kind of lofty on their high mountain and don't really come down, subject to madness, etc. You've got the Dornish doing their thing in their deserty climate, and the Northerners up there, and then the people from the Reach with their fertile lands, and then and their wealth, and then the Westerlands with their emphasis on Casterly Rock and some of those locations that are also very wealthy. And you see that just reflected in the character of somebody like even the Lannister from the House of the Dragon show that propositioned Rhaenyra, and hearing him talk about how high the rock is, Casterly Rock, and why it wouldn't be a step down in station for her to essentially marry him and join House Lannister, and all those sorts of things. And like again and again and again, the Lannisters in general, and George does this as well, where the family tends to repeat behaviors over time. Arguably the characters are just archetypical versions of each other. But the Lannisters are seemingly always trying to overstep their station, and then the Targaryens are essentially refusing them almost out of principle, not even on the merits of any case that could be made for why Cersei should marry Rhaegar, etc. So you have a situation where, as a character, Cersei clearly believes that she should have married Rhaegar, and I'll kind of go over this, but the Lannisters can't understand that the Dragon Kings, that they're thinking along lines that the Lannisters simply don't understand. And I talked about the example of Rhaenyra, but history is sort of repeating itself, and the lion stumbles, and they stumble into the throne because of Tywin. But then during this fourth book, Cersei seems to be thinking that even though the death of her son is a tragic event for her and is distressing, it's also a bit of an opportunity for her to assert herself politically and have her, her moment in the sun, which I don't know if that's an allusion to the Hour of the Wolf, but I think she knows this is a not for long sort of situation, but she is going to try and cling to power and assert power and all these sort of things. But I think Cersei's madness is pretty evident as you read. I think one of the things that struck me, just as a general observation, and then I'm going to get into specifics, but she seems to jump from thing to thing to thing in terms of ideas and what she's discussing, talking about with people so quickly and so wildly that I think is an indication of the madness. And then there's other things, like, it's going to be the first thing I read about, but it's her dream of herself on the Iron Throne before she realizes that they're about to wake her up and basically tell her that Tyrion has escaped and Tywin's dead and all these sorts of things. So what I'm going to do for this, though, unfortunately, George R.R. Martin doesn't have a table of friggin' contents in his books, and so it's a little more difficult to keep track of what's where when in the books. But I was just going to go through really quickly, and in some cases I'm just going to flip through, but in some cases I may read and get quotes just to go through some of these Cersei chapters and discuss some of what I think are the indications of her madness, whether it's her seemingly just insane plot to get the Kettleback dude to sleep with Marjorie Tyrell, which again, Cersei has done that herself in terms of sleeping with the Kettleback, and that thought is essentially ringing through Jaime's mind constantly because of what Tyrion said to him, which is another thing I like from the books as opposed to the show, is the way they're able to do this with certain quotes and have them recur in the minds of the characters. But anyway, so to start this first Cersei chapter from the book, so she dreamt she sat the Iron Throne high above them all. Courtiers or brightly colored mice below, yada yada. So, they're basically, she's smiling at them. Then Tyrion arrives. The dwarf appeared as if from nowhere, pointing at her and howling with laughter. And it's classic, Emperor's got no clothes on. Only then did the Queen realize she was naked. Horrified, she tried to cover herself with her hands. The barbs and blades of the Iron Throne bit into her flesh as she tried to crouched to hide her shame. So this thing of being cut on the throne is sort of a sign of one's unworthiness of the throne. So even in her dream, Cersei can't really escape the notion that she is not exactly worthy of the throne, but she's certainly going to assert a certain right to the throne. And so that's, an interesting depiction where it says the more she struggled, the more the throne engulfed her, tearing chunks of flesh from her breast and belly, slicing at her arms and legs until they were slick and red and glistening, and all the while her brother capered below laughing. And then she's woken up and they're telling her that Jaime needs her, etc. And, she thinks that Tyrion is down in the cells, but like in this universe a lot, these dreams are seemingly meaningful just in the sense of signs and portents. They don't really give people much in terms of marching orders. They just give them a little bit of directionality as far as indications of things that will happen, or sometimes motivations. But so, she says, my children will be safe, Tommen's throne will be secure, my twisted little Valonqar will be short ahead and rotting. So, she's not quibbling about being a kinslayer because she's trying to take, vengeance for her son. And then, there's Osmond Kettleback, and so she's got all sorts of Kingsguard around her, and Let's see. Yeah, it looks like they've basically told her that uh, that Tywin's been killed, and she basically she's trying to figure things out. And I guess I'm just gonna read some quotes from here rather than try and summarize this. So I'm gonna start from here. The guards were at their post, Your Grace, said Osmond Kettleback. Found a hidden door behind the hearth, secret passage. Lord Commander's gone down to see where it goes. Jaime, terror seized her, sudden as a storm. Jaime should be with the king. The lad's not been harmed, Sir Jaime sent a dozen men to look in on him. His Grace sleeping peaceful. Let him have a sweeter dream than mine, a kinder waking. Who is with the king? Sir Loras has that honor, if it please you. It did not please her. Tyrells were only stewards that the Dragon Kings had up-jumped far above their station. Their vanity was exceeded only by their ambition. Sir Loras might be as pretty as a maiden's dream, but underneath his white cloak he was Tyrell of the bone. For all she knew, this night's foul fruit had been planted and nurtured in Highgarden. So again, going back to the point I made a little bit earlier about the character of people from where they're from, and then this slightly ironic description from Cersei about up-jumped stewards that are far above their station. Now, that's just relevant because the Tyrells were never historically kings, whereas, for example, the Lannisters were, so clearly they are above their station, except for they have, again, this ignores certain precedents, though, where the Tyrells did have certain marriage alliances with the Targaryens and were more closely associated with them. So this is kind of historically inaccurate, but she's looking at it from her present perspective, so just move on from that. That was a suspicion she dare not speak aloud. Allow me to dress. Sir Osmond shall accompany me to the Tower of the Hand. Sir Boros, rouse the jailers, make sure the dwarf is still in his cell. She would not say his name, would have never found the courage to lift a hand against father, she told herself, but she had to be certain. So, not to judge, because her father's dead and her son was recently dead, but Cersei is not the quickest to receive information and process it properly. So she doesn't even believe that Tyrion would raise a hand against father, yet she believes that Tyrion murdered Joffrey. And the inconsistency of these opinions either doesn't occur to her, or she has her reason why she thinks that's not inconsistent, but she's not thinking very clearly. And so, yeah, this chapter, yeah, I guess I'll do this paragraph is also a good example of so basically so Cersei is arriving, and they tell her that Tywin was on the toilet when somebody basically needed to go to the bathroom as well and found him in there. So I'm going to read from Cersei's perspective. So this goes, "No, that cannot be. That is not the way a lion dies." Queen felt strangely calm. She remembered the first time she'd lost a tooth when she was just a little girl. It hadn't hurt. The hole in her mouth felt so odd she could not stop touching it with her tongue. Now there is a hole in the world where father stood, and holes want filling. If Tywin Lannister was truly dead, no one was safe, least of all her son upon his throne. When the lion falls, the lesser beasts move in, the jackals and the vultures and the feral dogs. They would try and push her to the aside, as they always had. She would need to move quickly, as she had when Robert died. This might be the work of Stannis Baratheon through some catspaw. could well be the prelude to another attack on the city. She hoped it was. Let him come. I will smash him just as father did, and this time he will die. Stannis did not frighten her, no more than Mace Tyrell did. No one frightened her. She was a daughter of the Rock, a lion. There will be no more talk of forcing me to wed again. Casterly Rock was hers now, and all the power of House Lannister. No one would ever disregard her again. Even when Tommen had no further need of a regent, the Lady of Casterly Rock would remain a power in the land. So you can sort of see that, this is characteristic, I think, of her thought process in this book, where she jumps very quickly from idea to idea, and sure, they're logically connected, but she jumps from point to point to point so quickly and without really thinking those thoughts through, to the extent that it's really almost impressive, but I think it's essentially indicative of madness, because, she goes from metaphorical lions falling, lesser beasts move in, then to getting more realistic, they would try to push her to the side, as they always had, so, her sort of trauma expressing itself, and she would need to move quickly, as she had when Robert died. Then her mind goes to Stannis Baratheon, although she's not aware that Stannis is way, way, way far to the north, so she's not really, thinking of necessarily the person who she should be, but her mind is going to certain things that are on her mind, and clearly that means that Stannis is still on her mind, especially vis-a-vis another attack on the city. And this notion, she hoped it was, let him come, I will smash him just as father did. This time he will die. Stannis did not frighten her no more than Mace Tyrell did. And what she doesn't put together right here is that Tywin had smashed Stannis with Mace Tyrell, and with the host of the Crownlands people, with the Stormlands and the guys from the Reach, and so she's not understanding essentially that she can't afford to alienate the Tyrells, because she's so busy alienating the Tyrells, and she's going to go to, frankly, insane lengths in this book, as far as what I've seen already, in terms of trying to get somebody to sleep with Marjorie Tyrell, which, frankly, as far as the TV show is concerned, I'm kind of glad I don't remember them ever going along these lines, because this storyline is honestly slightly stupid and could definitely be fodder for something to be cut from this story. But again, it's also a good indication of the sort of the madness of Cersei and sort of the way that she thinks. So, and I mean, she even says things like, it is not fitting for Tywin Lannister to die alone. Such a man deserves a retinue to attend his needs in hell. So, sort of a weird thought to have about your father. But then she essentially takes command immediately. No one is to enter or leave without my permission. She tells the 4 Lannister guards, and the command came easily to her. My father had steel in his voice as well. And then, within the tower, smoke from the torches had irritated her eyes, but Cersei didn't weep. No more than her father would have. I am the only true son he ever had. Her heels scraped against the stone as she climbed. She could still hear the froth fluttering wildly inside Sir Osmond's lantern. Die, the queen thought, edited with irritation. Fly into the flame, be done with it. So again, I don't need to analyze too much of why that is indicative of insanity. Just look at the elements again of the moth flying around, her explicit thoughts. They're slightly mad, and so, this is, on the one hand, slightly reasonable, because she is, looking at her father, and, so she goes into the room And of course, who's already in there is fucking Kevin Lannister. The dutiful Lannister is already in there trying to pray for his brother's friggin' soul, I guess. And then again, Cersei, just the madness of her thoughts. But Tyrion is only half a man. Thought made her angry. No, the dwarf is still locked in a black cell. This could not be his work. Stannis, she told herself. Stannis was behind it. He still has adherents in the city. Him, or the Tyrells, so... And then, there had always been talk of secret passages within the Red Keep. Maegor the Cruel was supposed to have killed the men who built the castle to keep the knowledge of them secret. How many other bedchambers have hidden doors? Then Cersei had a sudden vision of the dwarf crawling out from behind a tapestry in Tommen's bedchamber with a blade in hand. Tommen's well guarded, she told herself, but Lord Tywin had been well guarded too. And then she looks at Tywin for a moment. She did not recognize the dead man. He had hair like her father, yes, but this was some other man, surely a smaller man and much older. And Tywin's naked, but one thing that's a sign is something that she should notice at this point. The smell of him made her wrinkle her nose. So she's clearly dead. He's dead, and obviously he's going to smell a bit, but this is an indication of the fact that Tywin was likely poisoned before he died. Therefore, he was going to die anyway, and the smell of him made her wrinkle her nose. She should be more observant, and she should start figuring some of this stuff out, but even later, she will literally blame Pycelle for this instead of essentially recognizing something. And it's because, from her prosecution of Tyrion onward, Cersei has no concern with actual facts. She only has concerns with shaping things to her worldview, which is that, this is going to be her moment in the sun, not anybody else's. And again, Catelyn Stark comparison. They said Catelyn Stark had clawed her own face to bloody ribbons when the phrase slew her precious Robb. Would you like that, father? She wanted to ask him. Would you want me to be strong? Did you weep for your own father? And then still the story of Tytos and how her father was already the hand to the Mad King, and that he was often away in King's Landing when she and Jaime were young. And so if Tywin wept when they brought him word of his father Tytos' death, he did it where no one could see the tears. But then she gets a little outraged and says, how could you leave him like this? The bells have to ring for him as they rang. For Robert, he must be bathed and dressed as befits his stature. Where is Pycelle? Where is Pycelle? And they tell her that Pycelle is already seen to him. He came and saw and went, summon the Silent Sisters. And so, just to pause this real quick, there's no doubt that that Tywin will get, an honorable procession and all the bits, but ringing the bell for him as if he was the king, this is again this Lannister pretense that Tywin was the true power behind the throne of Aerys, and therefore that Tywin deserves to be treated like a king. But this just runs into the kind of the ugly butthole of reality that, frankly, Tywin wasn't king, and all you need to look for the evidence for that is the fact that his daughter didn't marry the prince. If he had been closer to Aerys, or somehow avoided provoking his wrath, which probably wasn't possible, but for the Lannisters to think that they were going to overtake the other families and vault themselves up, you can see the motivations and why that would be the case of them wanting to do that. But again, they think of themselves as royalty when they haven't, frankly, even been close to that recently. Alright, So I'm going to just start skipping through this a little bit, but yeah, I mean, just in general, like, in this chapter, they're basically just informing her of these things, and she's starting to take command, but you can see just her lack of understanding of things. You know, she's constantly projecting things onto Tyrion, and you know, that's probably because of her madness as far as thinking that Tyrion killed her mother, all these sorts of things. But yeah, I guess this is a good part where, so page 76. So Cersei decides, she says, "You must take father's place's hand. You see that now. Surely Tom will need you." He pushed away from her, raised his arm, forcing his stump into her face. "A hand without a hand? A bad jape, sister. Don't ask me to rule." Their uncle heard the rebuff. Qyburn as well and the Kettlebacks wrestling their bundle through the ashes. Even the guardsmen heard. Puckins and Hoke, the horse leg and short ear, be all over the castle by nightfall. Cersei felt the heat rising up her cheeks. "Rule? I said not of ruling. I shall rule until my son comes of age." "I don't know who I pity more," her brother said, "Tommen or the Seven Kingdoms." She slapped him. Jaime's arm rose to catch the blow. Cat quick, but this cat had the cripple's stump in place of a right hand. Her fingers left red marks on his cheek. Sound brought their uncle to his feet. "Your father lies here dead. Have the decency to take your quarrel outside." Jaime inclined his head in apology. "Forgive us, uncle. My sister is sick with grief. She forgets herself." She wanted to slap him again for that. "I must have been mad to think he could be hanged." Yes, you are. She would sooner abolish the office. When had a hand ever brought her anything but grief? John Arryn put Robert Baratheon in her bed, and before he died, he'd begun sniffing around her and Jaime as well. Eddard Stark took up right where Arryn left off. His meddling had forced her to rid herself of Robert sooner than she would have liked, before she could deal with his pestilential brothers. Tyrion sold Myrcella to the Dornish and made one of her sons a hostage and murdered the other. And when Lord Tywin returned to King's Landing, the next hand will know his place, she promised herself. It would have to be Sir Kevin. And she does this because she thinks he won't argue with her. And then it's almost like she gets literally everything wrong because Kevin doesn't want to go along with anything. Kind of reminds her and puts her in a place and yada yada yada. So I'm getting a little bit caught up in the details, and I'm gonna flip to the next section that I know she's got the chapter of, just to see if there's anything of serious significance in the chapter. Yes. So this is the chapter, I think, where they're heading to Tywin's wake, and she's dealing with Tommen, and so she's telling Tommen, and, you know, she's telling him things of what he needs to do, because Tommen wants basically the window open on the drive over, and Queen doesn't. And so it says, Tommen did as he was bid. His meekness troubled her. A king had to be strong. Joffrey would have argued he was never easy to cow. So she immediately starts to try and essentially fix the things she sees wrong with Tommen. Just sort of an indication that she hasn't been an excellent mother to him, seeing as she hasn't been attending to him. But let's see. guess this is I don't know if this is a different High Septon than the one later on that she makes the crazy deal with to forgive 900 some thousand gold of debt just because essentially she rearms the Faith Militant, and I saw her do that, and that shit was crazy too. But yeah, she talks about not liking to wear mourning garb, and then obviously, like, the important thing about so they talk about the fact that essentially Tywin, like, everybody sees pretty quickly that his body is smelling terrible and stuff. This is a good paragraph to talk about, though. So, unbidden memory came to her of the feast King Aerys had thrown when Cersei first came to court. Girl as green as summer grass, old Merryweather had been nattering about raising the duty on wine, and Lord Riker said, if we need gold, his grace should sit Lord Tywin on his chamber pot. Aerys and his lickspittles laughed loudly, whilst father stared at Riker over his wine cup. Long after the merriment had died, that gaze lingered. Riker turned away and turned back, met father's eyes, then ignored them, drank a tankard of ale, stalked off red-faced, defeated by a pair of unflinching eyes. Lord Tywin's eyes are closed forever now, Cersei thought. It is my look they will flinch from now, my frown they must fear. I'm a lion too. So that's whatever. She's a lion, not of the Tywin variety, but she certainly thinks so. But she's looking at Tywin as far as his eyes are concerned. And in this case, because he's at his wake, his eyes are closed, and so she talks about his eyes, the pale green, almost luminous, flecked with gold, which, for this discussion, it is important that Cersei does share Tywin's Lannister eyes. So, in that sense, at least, she gotta be at least part Lannister, because she's got the characteristic eyes, so that's one indication that we should view her as Tywin's daughter, not Aerys. But then again, this is talking about Cersei first coming to court, and so this is the time when Cersei is in King's Landing, Jaime's at Casterly Rock, I guess, so they're separated, but this is, I guess, either contemporaneous with or after or before when Tywin tries to make his presentation and proposal as far as wedding Rhaegar to Cersei. And so it's kind of an indication that the Lannisters are not seeing or not appreciating the full extent of the humiliation that Aerys is sort of subjected Tywin to. And then again, I think this does correct a little bit of the opinion I was sort of going for in one of the last pods of Aerys was clearly mad and, ha ha ha, very fucking funny from your, like they say, lick spittles. But I do enjoy a character who will then see some shit like that and just look that bitch-ass motherfucker in their eyes and just be like, yo, dog, I'm right here. You want to say that again to my face? Say it again. I dare you. And then, of course, bitch-ass motherfuckers never do that shit. And so, that is like a great paragraph right there. But then again, there's just like crazy thoughts going through Cersei's mind. It was gloomy within the sept, with the sky so gray outside. If the rain ever stopped, the sun would slant down through the hanging crystals to drape the corpse in rainbows. The Lord of Casterly Rock deserved rainbows. He'd been a great man. I shall be greater, though, 1,000 years from now. The maester's right. About this time you shall be remembered only as Queen Cersei's sire. And then this is when Mother Tommen tugged her sleeve. What smells so bad? Death. Cersei paid it no mind. The seven septons, blah, 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 you know. But then to skip down a little bit, Lord Giles coughing more than usual, covering his nose. He can smell it too. But basically what's going on here is everybody can smell the fact that, and it says here, the smell coming off her father's corpse seemed to have grown stronger. Most of the mourners had the decency to pretend that nothing was amiss. Cersei saw two of Lady Marjorie's cousins wrinkling their little Tyrell noses. As she and Tommen were walking back down the aisle, the queen thought she heard someone mutter privy and chortle. When she turned her head to see who had spoken, a sea of solemn faces gazed at her blankly. Would have never dared to make japes about him while he was still alive, would have turned their bowels to water with a look. But let's see if we can find another. So this is, she's talking to Lancel Lannister right now, and she does say knighting him was a mistake and betting him a bigger one. Yeah, and in the show, this dude becomes part of the Faith Militant, so I won't be surprised if that's also the way to go here. And yeah, because he's already under the influence of the High Septon. He says the mother spared me for some holy purpose, that I might atone for my deeds, and Cersei tells him atonement is best achieved through prayer. She told him silent prayer. So then she's talking to Marjorie, and yeah, and then she meets Tyanna Merryweather, who I guess she's going to become friends with, but then she's dealing with Mace Tyrell, and yeah, so at least in this scene she recognizes the power of the Tyrells and of Highgarden, and so she has to sort of entertain this dude, but then basically Tyrell asks her to be hand without actually asking, and she thinks to herself, if you want to be the king's hand, my lord, have the courage to say it plainly. And then she essentially rejects him, and yeah, she also rejects another recommendation that Tyrell had for one of the people on the council. Let's see. Yeah, and the person she picks is Giles, who's always coughing and will be in these scenes later in these council meetings, coughing constantly, and I guess it's another sign that Cersei essentially makes poor decisions just on, usually for petty reasons for the most part. Yeah, and then she gives the mountain to Qyburn instead of just letting him fucking die and shit. Yeah, and then this is the scene with Kevin where yeah, this is a good scene, I guess, so I'll start from here. So, Cersei had not expected Kevin to require coaxing. He never played coy with father. The realm needs you. The realm, I and House Lannister. He sipped his wine again. Very well, I will remain and serve his grace, ... Very good, she started to say, but Sir Kevin raised his voice and bowled right over her. ... So long as you name me regent as well, and hand and take yourself back to Casterly Rock. For half a heartbeat, Cersei could only stare at him. I am the regent, she reminded him. You were. Tywin did not intend that you continue in that role. Told me of his plans to send you back to the Rock and find a new husband for you. Cersei could feel her anger rising. He spoke of such, yes, and I told him it was not my wish to wed again. Her uncle was unmoved. If you are resolved against another marriage, I will not force it on you. As to the other, though, you are the lady of Casterly Rock now. The place is there. How dare you, she wanted to scream. Instead, she said, I am also the Queen Regent. My place is with my son. Your father thought not. My father is dead. To my grief and the woe of all the realm. Open your eyes, Cersei, and look about you. Kingdom is in ruins. Tywin might have been able to set matters aright, but I shall set matters aright. Cersei softened her tone. With your help, uncle. If you will serve me as faithfully as you serve my father, you are not your father. And Tywin always regarded Jaime as his rightful heir. Jaime has taken vows. Jaime never thinks. He laughs at everything and everyone and says whatever comes into his head. Jaime is a handsome fool. And yet, he was your first choice to be the king's hand. What does that make you, Cersei? I told you. I was sick with grief. I did not think. No, Sir Kevin agreed. 'Tis why you should return to Casterly Rock and leave the king with those who do. The king is my son. Cersei rose to her feet. Aye, her uncle said. From what I saw of Joffrey, you are as unfit a mother as you are a ruler. She threw the contents of her wine cup full in his face. Sir Kevin rose with a ponderous dignity. Your grace. Wine trickled down his cheeks and dripped from his close-cropped beard. With your leave, might I withdraw? By what right do you presume to give me terms? You are no more than one of my father's household knights. I hold no lands, that is true, but I have certain incomes and chests of coins set aside. My own father forgot none of his children when he died. Tywin knew how to reward good service. I feed 200 knights, I can double that number if need be. There are free riders who will follow my banner, and I have the gold to hire sellswords. You would be wise not to take me lightly, your grace, and wiser still not to make of me a foe. Are you threatening me? I am counseling you. If you will not yield the regency to me, name me your castellan for Casterly Rock, and make either Mathis Rowan or Randall Tarley the hand of the king. Tyrell Bannerman, both of them. Suggestion left her speechless. Is he bought? She wondered. Has he taken Tyrell gold to betray House Lannister? That Mathis Rowan is sensible, prudent, well-liked, her uncle went on, oblivious. Randall Tarley is the finest soldier in the realm, forehand for peacetime. With Tywin dead, there's no better man to finish this war. Lord Tyrell cannot take offense if you choose as one of his own, as bannerman, as hand. Both Tarley and Rowan are able men and loyal. Name either one, and you make him yours. You strengthen yourself and weaken Highgarden, yet Mace will likely thank you for it. He gave a shrug. That is my counsel, take it or no. You may make Moonboy your hand for all I care. My brother is dead, woman. I am going to take him home. Traitor, she thought. Turncloak. She wondered how much Mace Tyrell had given him. You would abandon your king when he needs you the most, she told him. You would abandon Tommen. Tommen has his mother. Sir Kevin's green eyes met her own, unblinking. Last drop of wine trembled, wet and red beneath his chin, finally fell. Aye, he added softly after a pause, and his father too, I think. So that's him just straight up owning Cersei with the fact that, he knows that all of Cersei's children are Jaime's bastards, Jaime and her bastards, and so the next chapter is Jaime standing guard around Tywin and essentially going through the smell thing again so that it can make, extra clear what's going on. And basically, Jaime, he's not, I think the difference is Jaime understands that he's frankly not that intelligent, and so he doesn't pretend to be. But there are other people like Cersei who try desperately to pretend to be intelligent, and that, that leads to negative consequences. But let's see. Yeah, and then I guess I'm still in the Jaime chapter, but yeah, when Tyrion told him that Lancel and Osmond Kettleback and Moonboy, for all he knew, geez, that really just echoes through Jaime's mind consistently. But anyway, that's not that important, so we're gonna skip ahead to the next Cersei chapter. Yeah, so this is Tommen's wedding, and she's unhappy that Jaime is still unshaven, and the fact that he's in white, which again, I think this might be slightly different from what's portrayed at the beginning of the book, where Jaime has red ornamentation on his armor or whatever, but she basically doesn't like when she doesn't control Jaime, and kind of like when she was incesting with him when they were younger, but then decided she really had eyes for Rhaegar. She's always looking out for her own interest, essentially. So yeah, and then, so they're at Tommen's wedding, and she's telling Jaime these sort of crazy things about, I will not have Tommen alone with Marjorie, not for so much as half a heartbeat. And then it's getting back to the point husband and wife should sleep together, even if they do no more than sleep. So Cersei is trying to control Tommen's wedding, which again, what kind of king is Tommen ever supposed to be if Cersei is doing all this? And then she's having this long conversation with Jaime. Yeah, this is another good example. So Cersei keeps going over this idea that Tyrion is still hiding in the castle somewhere, which is not logically impossible, but is not likely. So let's just go over this little paragraph here. Would that we could do the same to the rest of this foul castle, said Cersei. After the war, I mean to build a new palace beyond the river. She had dreamed of it the night before last. Magnificent white castle surrounded by woods and gardens. Long leads from the stinks and noise of King's Landing. The city is a cesspit for half a groat. I had moved the court to Lannisport and rule the realm from Casterly Rock. That would be an even greater folly than burning the Tower of the Hand. So long as Tommen sits the Iron Throne, the realm sees him as the true king. Hide him under the rock, and he becomes just another claimant to the throne, no different than Stannis. I am aware that, the queen said sharply. I said that I wanted to move the court to Lannisport, not that I would. Were you always this slow, or did you losing a hand make you stupid? Jaime ignored that. If these flames spread beyond the tower, you may end up burning down the castle whether you mean to or not. Wildfire is treacherous. Lord Helene has assured me that his pyromancers can control the fire. The Guild of Alchemists had been brewing fresh wildfire for a fortnight. Let all of the King's Landing see the flames. It will be a lesson to our enemies. Now you sound like Ares. Guard your tongue, sir. I love you too, sweet sister. So, that little quote from Jaime, now you sound like Ares. Again, from Jaime's conversation with Brienne, where he reveals that he basically saved King's Landing from wildfire being deployed on the entire city. Jaime really understands what it would mean for wildfire to be used. But Cersei is just entertained and interested in the idea of it. And so she basically burns down the Tower of the Hand for reasons, and in the process ends up sounding just like Ares. And sort of the other echo of that is the fact of her little dream of a new capital essentially being a version of Ares' dream of moving and creating a white marble new capital, all these sorts of things, which again is it's a stupid idea, because the capital is not dirty because the king lives there. The capital is dirty because there's a bunch of people who live near the king. So if the fucking castle is just moved somewhere, presumably all the attention is just gonna relocate to there, and it's gonna smell. So the idea that, you know, that Cersei would essentially even mention in conversations with people, oh, I want to move the court to Lannisport, I want a new I don't want a new court, I wanted this, I wanted that. It's like a sensible ruler really wouldn't mention that in conversations with others, because it makes you look unserious. It's like, oh, you were just joking? What else are you just joking about? How much of what you say can I seriously take seriously? And so, yeah, so marriage, yada yada. And yeah, and then they're just having this event where they burn up the fucking Tower of the Hand for whatever reason with wildfire. And so the fire is burning, and one of the things, I guess, that's supposed to be metaphorical is that the fire is green, so it's a lot like Cersei's eyes, essentially. And it's beautiful. She thought as beautiful as Joffrey when they laid him in my arms. No man had ever made her feel as good as she felt when he took her nipple in his mouth to nurse. Tommen stared wide-eyed at the fires, as fascinated as he was frightened, until Marjorie whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. Some of the knights began to make wagers on how long it would take before the tower collapsed. Lord Helene stood humming to himself and rocking on his heels. Cersei thought of all the king's hands that she had known over the years: Owen Merryweather, John Connington, Carlton Chested, John Arryn, Eddard Stark, and her brother Tyrion, and her father, Lord Tywin Lannister, her father most of all. All of them are burning now, she told herself, savoring the thought. They are dead and burning, every one, with all their plots and schemes and betrayals. It is my day now. It is my castle and my kingdom. Tower of the Hand gave out a sudden groan, so loud all conversation stopped abruptly. Stone cracked and split. Part of the upper battlements fell away. Landed with a crash, shook the hill, sending up a cloud of dust and smoke. Fresh air rushed in through the broken masonry. Fire surged upward. Green flames leapt through into the sky, whirled around each other. Tommen shied away, till Marjorie took his hand and said, "Look, the flames are dancing just as we did, my love. They are." His voice was filled with wonder. "Mother, look, they're dancing. I see them. Lord Helene, how long will the fires burn?" "All night, your grace." "It makes a pretty candle, I grant you," said Lady Olenna Tyrell, leaning on her cane between left and right. "Bright enough to see us to sleep, I think." So she's going to sleep. "It is time for King and Queen were put to bed." "Yes, Cersei, Bacon, to Jaime, Lord Commander, escort his grace and his little queen to their pillows, if you would." "As you command, as you as well." "No need." Cersei felt too alive for sleep. The wildfire was cleansing her, burning away all her rage and fear, filling her with resolve. "The flames are so pretty, I want to watch them for a while." Jaime hesitated. "You should not stay alone." "I will not be alone. Sir Osmond can remain for me and keep me safe. Your sworn brother, If it please your grace, it does. Cersei slid her arm through his, and side by side they watched the fire rage. So this again is sort of another potential clue as to Cersei potentially being the daughter of the Mad King in terms of her fascination with wildfire, Targaryen sort of attitude towards it. But then again, you could also say this woman is just fucking crazy. You know, she's standing there with Osmond Kettleback, who her brother is basically sort of aware that Cersei has cheated on him with Kettleback, even though Cersei's not aware that he's aware of this. And so when Cersei, decides to watch the flames and Jaime hesitates, he's probably hesitating because he's seeing a bit of an echo of the behavior of the Mad King, and it's slightly disturbing to see that. And so that's why he wants to remain, and then she doesn't let him. So that's that chapter, and that's like another example of the madness thing where, she's lighting shit on fire. She's kind of doing her whole thing, and then Jaime in another chapter, he has a conversation with Kevin Lannister, and Kevin Lannister is a savage in terms of Jaime's trying to get him to be Hand of the King, and Kevin says, "Your sister knows my terms; they have not changed. Tell her that the next time you're in her bedchamber," putting an abrupt end to the conversation. Jaime let him go, his missing sword hand twitching. He had hoped against hope Cersei had somehow misunderstood, but that was plainly wrong. He knows about the two of us and Tom and Marcella, and Cersei knows he knows. Sir Kevin was a Lannister of Casterly Rock. He could not believe she would ever do him harm, but I was wrong about Tyrion. What about Cersei? So he's essentially worried that she will try and kill Kevin. So that's interesting too. It's kind of fucked. Then the next chapter, interestingly, we got the twin chapters back to back. We got a Jaime and a Cersei. Yeah, so this is one of the chapters that I saw that really set me off. So just to quickly go through it, they have the scene where they bring in the dwarf heads for Cersei, and she tells them that it's the wrong dwarf, and etc. So that's how her day sort of starts. Then she goes to Qyburn. She's having a discussion with him, and she basically, number one, she enjoys the fact that she annoys Pycelle by including Qyburn on the council, and Qyburn is serving as master of whisperers, and she basically believes it was the silver all along, not the spider, so she really doesn't have an understand of how important Varys was. And then she tries to have her meeting, and her dude Giles is coughing the whole fucking time, Rosby, and then so my counselor, Cersei, had uprooted every rose and all those beholden to her uncle and her brothers. In their places were men whose loyalty would be to her. The queen would have no masters at court besides herself. Orton master, Meriwether was her justiciar. So, yeah, and she picks a dude who's obsequious for her hand and other things, and will the king be joining us? My son is playing with his little queen. For the moment, his idea of kingship is stamping papers with his royal seal. His grace is still too young to comprehend affairs of state, and she doesn't want to include Jaime either in the meeting. So she's not doing a very good job as regent of preparing Tommen to rule, but she frankly doesn't care, because this is her moment in the sun. She doesn't care. And then she's starting to conspire to send a fake head of Gregor Clegane to the Dornish, thinking that that's gonna appease them, but they're conspiring with the Targaryens, essentially. That's not going to happen. Yeah, and so Cersei comes up with this idea that she's going to defer the repayment of sums owed to the Holy Faith in the Iron Bank until the end of the war, which is essentially defaulting on debt. So Pycelle tells her that, that the Braavosi are going to come for their money, and they do, although they don't do anything in particular, so... I think there's something, though, towards the end of this chapter. Yeah, so then towards the end of this chapter, she's dealing with Osney Kettleback, and she basically seduces him into... so she comes up with this strange plan, and so Cersei says, "Why not both?" she whispered. "Pluck the little rose for me, and you will not find me to be ungrateful." And then the Kingsguard is basically like, wasn't there a Kingsguard who lost his head for doing some shit like this? Cersei did not want Osney dwelling on that ancient unpleasantness. And she says, "I mean for Marjorie to lose her head, not you." That gave him pause. "Her maidenhead, you mean that too, assuming she still has one. Unless you think Marjorie would prove unresponsive to your charms, then, that dude, he does what she wants." And so her idea, even Mace Tyrell would not defend his darling daughter if she was caught in the act with the likes of Osney Kettleback. And it's like, well, she did the same thing, and so she really just doesn't think these things through, doesn't really think things through to their logical conclusions, and it leads her just to fail to really perceive things correctly. So again, I could go through some of these chapters. I think especially if you go through the chapter from 490 to 516 is a good example of this, but basically Tommen says, "The throne belongs to me." She says, "Who told you that?" "No one. Is that who you call your lady wife?" The queen could smell Marjorie Tyrell all over this rebellion. "If you lie to me, I have no choice to send for Pate and have him beaten till he bleeds." And then, so Tommen has to admit that his wife was the one who told him that he needs to sit on the throne, and she tells him that, "I don't need a silly little boy fidgeting on the throne behind me, distracting with childish questions." Yes, he admitted, she says, "I have to learn how to be king." And Cersei basically says, "You'll get there when you're older, but not right now while you're young." And so, the rule was hers. Cersei did not mean to give it up until Tommen came of age. "I waited, so can he. I waited half my life." She played the dutiful daughter, blushing bride, the pliant wife. She'd suffered Robert's drunken groping, Jaime's jealousy, Renly's mockery, Varys with his titters, Stannis' endless grinding of his teeth. She had contended with Jon Arryn, Ned Stark, and her vile, treacherous, murderous dwarf brother, all the while promising to herself that one day it would be her turn. "If Marjorie Tyrell thinks to cheat me of my hour in the sun, she had bloody well think again." That's not written very well. But so she just kind of goes about her business, and she has a large number of duties, but Yeah, so they're basically telling Cersei that Marjorie's never alone with the kettleback dude in order to have a serious opportunity and whatnot. But yeah, and so she says, I hope his sword is quicker than his wits. The day may come that Tommen has some need of it. And again, this is just the sort of people that she sort of puts into positions of power, these lickspittles, not realizing how much she's kind of acting like Aerys in that regard. Let's see. Yeah, so there's a lot in this chapter where Tommen is essentially trying to assert himself, whether it's the jousting or sitting on the throne, all these different things. Yeah. Yeah. So I've given some examples and I've kind of gone on for a while. But to kind of get back to the quote that I really started with, that I wanted to discuss. So Cersei has found Tommen in bed with 3 kittens. The queen gave them to him, only meant to give him one, blah, blah, blah. And then, so Cersei's thought first, better than cutting them out of her mother with a dagger, I suppose, aka Joffrey. Marjorie's clumsy attempts at seduction were so obvious as to be laughable. Tommen's too young for kisses, so she gives him kittens. Cersei rather wished they are not black, though. Black cats brought ill luck, as Rhaegar's little girl had discovered in this very castle. She would have been my daughter if the Mad King had not played his cruel jape on father. It had to have been madness that led the Aerys to refuse Lord Tywin's daughter and take his son instead, whilst marrying his own son to a feeble Dornish princess with black eyes and a flat chest. The memory of the rejection still rankled even after all these years. Many a night she had watched Prince Rhaegar in the hall playing his silver-stringed harp with those long, elegant fingers of hers. Had any man ever been so beautiful? He was more than a man, though. His blood was the blood of old Valyria, the blood of dragons and gods. When she was just a little girl, her father had promised her that she would marry Rhaegar. She could not have been more than 6 or 7. Never speak of it, child, he had told her, smiling his secret smile that only Cersei ever saw. Not until his grace agrees to the betrothal. It must remain our secret for now. So it had, though once she had drawn a picture of herself lying behind Rhaegar on a dragon, her arms wrapped tight around his chest. When Jaime had discovered it, she told him it was a picture of Queen Alysanne and King Jaehaerys. She was 10 when she finally saw her prince in the flesh at the tourney her father had thrown to welcome King Aerys to the west. Viewing stands had been raised beneath the walls of Lannisport, and the cheers of the small folk echoed off Casterly, the rock like rolling thunder. They cheered father twice as loudly as they cheered the king, Queen recalled, but only half as loudly as they cheered Prince Rhaegar. 17 and new to knighthood, Prince Rhaegar had worn black plate over golden ring mail when he cantered onto the lists. Long streamers of red, gold, and orange silk had floated out behind his helm like flames. 2 of her uncles fell before his lance, along with a dozen of her father's finest jousters, the flower of the West. By night the prince played his silver harp and made her weep. When she had been presented to him, Cersei had almost drowned in the depths of his sad purple eyes. He has been wounded, she recalled, thinking, but I will mend his heart when we are wed. Next to Rhaegar, even her beautiful Jaime, it seemed no more than a callow boy. Prince is going to be my husband, she had thought. giddy with excitement, and when the old king dies, I'll be the queen. Her aunt had confided her that truth to her before the tourney. You must be especially beautiful, Lady Jenna told her, fussing with the dress, for at the final feast it shall be announced that you and Prince Rhaegar are betrothed. Cersei had never been so happy that day, otherwise she would never have dared visit the tent of Maggie the Frog. She had only done it to show Jane and Melara that lioness fear nothing. I was going to be a queen. Why should a queen be afraid of some hideous old woman? The memory of that foretelling still made her flesh crawl. A lifetime later, Jane ran shrieking from the tent in fear. The queen remembered, but Melara stayed, and so did I. We let her taste our blood and laughed at her stupid prophecies. None of them made the least bit of sense. She was going to be Prince Rhaegar's wife, no matter what the woman said. Her father had promised it, and Tywin's word was gold. Her laughter died at tourney's end. There had been no final feast, no toast to celebrate her betrothal to Prince Rhaegar. Only cold silences and chilly looks between the king and her father. Later, when Aerys and his son and all his gallant knights had departed for King's Landing, the girl had gone to her aunt in tears, not understanding. Your father proposed the match, Lady Jenna told her, but Aerys refused to hear of it. You are my most able servant, Tywin, the king said, but a man does not marry his heir to his servant's daughter. Dry those tears, little one. Have you ever seen a lion weep? Your father will find another man for you, a man better than Rhaegar. Her aunt had lied, though, and her father had failed her, just as Jaime was failing her now. Father had found no better man. Instead, he gave me Robert, and Maggie's curse bloomed like some poisoned flower. If she had only married Rhaegar as the gods intended, she would have never looked twice at the wolf girl. Rhaegar would be our king today, and I would be his queen, the mother of his sons. She had never forgiven Robert for killing him, but then lions were not good at forgiving, as Sir Bronn of the Blackwater would shortly learn. So, I don't even need to analyze that too much as far as just leaving it lay that whole scene is very interesting, but clearly it demonstrates how the Lannisters always have these high expectations that sort of then run into the reality. In that case, it was just the reality of the relations between the king and his hand weren't sufficient, such that the king would betroth the prince to the lord's daughter, etc. So and then at the beginning of this next chapter, she's looking for evidence that essentially Renly Baratheon had sex with Marjorie after marrying her. Blah, blah, blah. I think there's another anecdote here, though, that's important. The other thing that's important in this chapter is just that they go to the Sept of Baelor, and essentially what she does is, so, there are people there, and they're pissed off, and then the High Septon essentially negotiates a deal where they forgive like $900,000 of debt in exchange for the Faith Militant being rearmed. And so another quote just to demonstrate Cersei's madness here, though, being a Sept of Baelor. King Baelor imprisoned his own sisters. His only crime was being beautiful. First time Cersei heard that little tale, she'd gone to Tyrion's nursery and pinched that little monster until he cried. Should have pinched his nose shut and stuffed my sock into his mouth. She forced herself to smile. So, that's another sort of indication into Cersei's sort of mindset. And but anyway, she rearms the Faith Militant, and clearly this is not going to work for her. But it's another example of where Cersei does these things and then she feels very satisfied with herself when she does them, as far as she thinks that she's making good decisions. But as anybody who's seen the show knows, her getting the Faith Militant involved is not going to help her at all. At the end of the day, it's actually it's gonna backfire directly onto Cersei, and she's gonna be taken hostage, etc. And so it's just interesting to look at Cersei and to think that, the Lannisters, seemingly their character that they always think that they're gonna finally be advanced to the level of being on the level of the Baratheons or even the Tyrells or some of these other families, and it just doesn't even happen for them. But the interesting thing in this story is just seeing those people happening to be on the throne for however long a period of time, and just looking to see what the consequences of that are, etc. So that's me going on long enough about that. Just wanted to do a little bit of an extended look into this, but I've sort of discussed the chapter with Tyrion before the Oberyn's battle with the Mountain to go through that, and so just thought that this was sort of similar material to go through, and I was interested to do that. So that's it for pod number 10. Thanks.